His presence irritates me. I genuinely wish he would just disappear. She laughed after she said it. That's the part nobody tells you about, the laugh. It wasn't cruel the way movie villains are cruel. It was easy, relaxed, the kind of laugh you give when you're saying something you believe for so long it stopped feeling dangerous. I was standing in the hallway of the house I built. Not metaphorically. I mean, I stood in the architectural meetings. I chose the floor grade. I argued with the contractor about the crown molding because Helen had pointed to it in a magazine, and I wanted her to have exactly that. The hallway smelled like the cedar diffuser she kept on the entry table, and I was holding my work boots in my left hand because I always took them off at the door, because she asked me to years ago, and I never stopped. My name is Joshua Santos. I'm a civil engineer. I built a contracting firm out of a single truck in 14 years of early mornings, and I am the kind of man who takes his boots off at the door even when no one is watching. I had come home early. A site meeting canceled. I thought about texting her, but I didn't, and now I know that was one of those decisions that changes everything. Not because I was trying to catch her, but because I wasn't. Because it never occurred to me there was anything to catch. She was in the living room. Her voice carried the way it always did when she was comfortable. Open, bright, slightly performative. She was on the phone with someone whose laughter I could faintly hear from the other end. A woman's laugh. One of her Scottsdale friends, probably. The one she'd had before me, and kept carefully separate from me, like two bank accounts. I heard my name first. Then I heard what came after it. I stood in the hallway for a long time after she said it. Long enough that the cedar smell started to feel wrong. Long enough that I looked, without meaning to, at the framed photo on the entry table, me and my father at a job site in 1998. The year he lost everything and the year he started rebuilding. He's squinting into the sun. I'm 17 and holding a level. I straightened the frame, which had shifted slightly, and I walked back out the front door. I put my boots on in the driveway. I want to tell you that I gave her what she asked for. I disappeared. I want to tell you it was clean and righteous, and that I knew exactly what I was doing. But what I remember most about that driveway is that my hands were completely steady. What I never told anyone, what no one knew then, is that I had already been preparing, not for that moment, for the one that was coming after it. Please, before I continue, kindly support me by, sharing, and subscribing for more interesting stories. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived at 7 a.m, a process server. I signed for them in my work boots, already dressed for the site, and I read the document over black coffee at the kitchen counter of my apartment. The modest one I'd moved into quietly 2 weeks after the hallway. My hands didn't shake. I read every page the way I read structural reports, looking for the load-bearing lie. I found it on page 4. The petition claimed I had abandoned the marital home. I read that line twice. Then I opened a specific drawer, not the junk drawer, a particular one, and I placed the papers inside next to a document I had filed 8 months earlier. A written notification. Certified mail. Helen had signed for it herself. I called one number after that. Raymond Okafor picked up on the second ring. I didn't explain anything. I just said, start where we discussed. He said, already have. I hung up and finished my coffee. Outside, a crew was breaking ground on a foundation 2 blocks away. I watched them through the window and thought about what real ground feels like before anything is built on it. For years before the hallway, Helen introduced me at a company dinner as the one who keeps the lights on. She laughed. Her friends laughed. I smiled and refilled her glass. Driving home, I realized she hadn't said my name once the entire evening. Not once. I filed that away the way I file invoices. Quietly, without ceremony, in a place I could find later. That was the earliest sign. Not a confrontation. Not a fight. Just a woman at a dinner table who had stopped seeing the person sitting next to her. Back in the present, I was at the satellite office, the one Helen didn't know existed, signing a restructuring document. The date on the header was 14 months before she ever made that phone call. Pauline Greco, my executive assistant, handed me a binder without a word. She'd been logging every financial transfer, every account movement, every structural decision I'd made during the marriage. Time-stamped, clean, unimpeachable, I looked at the binder and thought about that dinner, about how long a man can file things away before the drawer gets full. Pauline said, "Everything's logged." I nodded and signed the document. Raymond Okafor's office in Philadelphia smelled like old paper and certainty. I flew out specifically. He had the divorce petition spread across his desk alongside 3 documents I never sent him. He'd found them himself, which told me everything I needed to know about him. He's 51, built like a man who used a run, and stopped only because he didn't need to prove anything anymore. Former IRS investigator. 14 years in family law. He circled one line on the petition, in red ink, the abandonment claim, without explaining why. Then he looked up and said, "She filed her whole strategy on a story that isn't true." He said it the way you state a material specification, not an opinion. A fact. He poured 2 coffees and mentioned, while pouring, that he once traced $400,000 through 4 shell accounts during his IRS years. He said it casually, the way you mentioned the weather. It didn't connect to anything yet. I stored it. Raymond straightened his jacket and said, "By the time we're done, the only thing she'll be dividing is the cost of her own mistakes. No heat in it, just forecast." I drove past the house because it was on the route to a job site. That's all it was. Helen and Derek Hollis were on the front steps. Derek was wearing the kind of watch you buy so people notice it. Broad face, thick band, the specific accessory of a man who needs a room to know he has money. He had his arm around Helen's shoulder in a way that performed ownership more than it expressed it. I slowed without stopping. I watched for 3 seconds exactly, the way you assess a structure before you decide whether it'll hold. Derek was a wealth manager from Scottsdale, credentials that looked impeccable until you read the fine print. Helen met him 8 months before the hallway. I know, because Pauline logged his number in the household call records. He was advising Helen on something financial. I could see papers through the window, him gesturing. I drove on. What I felt wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. I narrated it to myself in the car, because that's how I've always processed things. I felt the way you feel watching someone carry a bag that's about to break. Patient, waiting. My apartment at 5:30 in the morning is the quietest place I've ever been comfortable. I made coffee. My father called. Thomas Santos, 74, Tucson, the original contractor, the man who lost everything in 1998 and rebuilt in 5 years on ground nobody else wanted. We didn't talk about Helen. We talked about concrete mix ratios and whether a project of mine in Tucson needed regrading. At some point he asked, "You sleeping?" I said yes. He said, "Then you're fine." We hung up. I picked up his old work journal from the counter, worn leather cover, rubber band around a specific page, and I put it in my bag without opening it. I'd been carrying it for 3 weeks. I hadn't opened it yet. I wasn't ready for what I knew it said. That evening, across the city, Helen was at a charity luncheon. I know, because Pauline still had mutual contacts. Helen told someone there, "He walked away from everything. He has nothing now." I wasn't there to hear it, but when Pauline told me later, I thought about the journal in my bag, and I almost smiled. Helen's attorney was a Scottsdale litigator named Brenda Cross. Polished, aggressive, good at her job in a specific way that works until it doesn't. She filed a motion claiming my company assets were marital property I had concealed through a legal restructuring after the marriage deteriorated. She argued abandonment. She argued financial deception. The motion was detailed and confident, and anyone who hadn't seen what Raymond was building, it looked airtight. Raymond received it, read it once, and called me. "She filed 11 days before the discovery deadline," he said, "which means she filed before she knew what we had." A pause. That was her only move, and she just used it. The hearing was in 14 days. That night, Raymond sent me a photograph of his table. Pauline's binder stacked in a row, specific transfers flagged in yellow, one particular document circled in red. I recognized the circled document immediately. It was the certified notification, the one Helen signed for, the one sitting in my specific drawer. Raymond had his own copy. He'd had it since our first phone call. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to use it. That moment was now 13 days away. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Judge Constance Ray entered without theater. No sweeping robes, no performative gravity. Just a 58-year-old woman who had heard every version of every story and was interested only in documentation. Helen sat at the opposing table in a specific shade of blue, the same blue she wore the night we met, at a fundraiser in Scottsdale 11 years ago. I noticed and said nothing. I don't know if she chose it deliberately. I don't know if it mattered. Brenda Cross arranged her documents with the precision of someone accustomed to winning. Derek was in the gallery. He checked his watch 3 times before proceedings began. Raymond hadn't touched anything on our table. His hands were folded. His binders were closed. He looked like a man waiting for a bus he knew was already on its way. Judge Ray reviewed the discovery submissions in silence for 47 seconds. I counted. Then she removed her glasses, looked at the opposing table, and said, "Before we proceed, Counselor, I have a question about the timeline of the scene in my memory ends there, because what came next changed everything." And Helen was still smiling. Judge Ray's question was about the timeline of the restructuring. Specifically, whether the satellite company predated the marriage's deterioration or caused it. Brenda Cross began to answer. Raymond stood quietly and submitted Pauline's complete records without a word. Ray reviewed them for 4 minutes. The courtroom held its breath. Then Ray confirmed what the documents showed. The satellite company was established 14 months before the marriage reached any documented crisis point, under a restructuring plan filed legally, transparently, and on record with the state. The abandonment claim dissolved next, because a certified notification existed, because Helen's signature was on it, because the drawer I described to Raymond on our first call contained exactly what I said it contained. Ray's voice was flat, official. She was not moved. She was accurate. I sat stone-faced. But inside, and only the people watching this will know this, I felt something break. Not in a bad way. The way a fever breaks. 12 years of carrying something heavy, and it was suddenly quietly on the ground. I looked at Helen once. Her face said nothing. Not rage. Not grief. Something worse. The expression of a person realizing the story they've been telling themselves was never true. Raymond and I walked a food truck outside the courthouse during recess. Construction crews were working the adjacent block. New foundation going in, rebar visible above the excavation line. I ordered without looking at the menu. Raymond watched me eat for a moment and then said, "Your father rebuilt in 5 years. You never forgot that." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, stated the way Raymond states everything, accurately and without decoration. I didn't answer. I ate and watched the rebar. Across the parking lot, Helen and Brenda Cross were in a car. Brenda was on her phone, animated, scrolling. Helen was staring out the window, not at me, at the construction site. I could see the shift from where I stood. The confidence was gone. She was recalculating. Raymond followed my eyes and said, without looking at me, "Derek Hollis's name is in the financial discovery filings, not as a witness." He finished his coffee. As an advisor. He said it once. He didn't elaborate. He crumpled his cup and walked back toward the courthouse. I stood there another moment, watching the rebar, thinking about what gets buried in a foundation and what gets built on top of it. Raymond presented Derek Hollis's 2019 civil judgment with the same energy he'd used to pour coffee in his Philadelphia office. Calm, unhurried, slightly bored. Breach of fiduciary duty. A separate client. Public record. He then traced, document by document, the financial strategy Derek had advised Helen to pursue during these proceedings, and laid it beside the 2019 case until the parallel was visible to everyone in the room, including Judge Ray, including Brenda Cross, including Derek himself, sitting in the gallery with his expensive watch in his suddenly very still hands. Raymond submitted everything and sat down. He didn't editorialize. He didn't perform. Helen reached for her water glass and stopped. Her hand stayed suspended, halfway to glass, halfway back, for 1 full second before she pulled it to her lap. Nobody commented. The courtroom just absorbed it. I looked at the table. I thought about my father's line, build on real ground, not because someone told you to, but because you've seen what happens to everything built on anything else. I thought about Derek in the window of my old house, gesturing at papers, advising Helen on the exact strategy that had already failed him once. The bag had broken, right on schedule. 3 years passed. They passed away recovery passes, not fast, not slow, but purposefully, one real thing at a time. The settlement was fair. The firm expanded. The Tucson project Raymond mentioned in passing became the largest contract my company had ever signed. I didn't celebrate. I worked. One Tuesday morning, Helen texted and asked if we could meet. I picked a coffee shop near the courthouse. Neutral ground, my choice, my timing. I ordered before she arrived, including what she always used to drink, because some habits outlive the reasons you formed them. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom. Not diminished, just real. The performance was gone. She sat down and said the word sorry in a way that sounded like it had cost her something genuine, and I believed her, and I let the belief sit, without building anything on top of it. I reached into my bag and set my father's work journal on the table. I opened it to the page with the rubber band. One line, in his handwriting, from 1998, the year he lost everything. The man who leaves the table calm always wins. I read it. I closed it. I put it back in my bag and finished my coffee. She had wished me gone. I had gone. And everything I built in that disappearance was still standing.